Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're going to continue to talk about real estate investing. The first lecture, we did kind of just an overview. The second lecture, we talked about pros and cons for a 15-year versus 30-year mortgage, and also how to do the calculations to figure out what is going to be the best option for you mortgage wise in the long term. So next, we're going to be talking about the complete process, start to finish, just overview of your plan from start to finish, including your rental description, startup expenses, ongoing expenses, target market, researching your market, and screening potential tenants as well. Okay, so before buying your first rental, make sure you're able to answer the following questions. Okay, so who is your target market? Is it a university or college students? Is it a family? Is it a single person or couple? Who is that target market? Right? Now, based on your target market, what location are you going to choose? Right? What features is your target market looking for? So, for example, if it's college and university students who attend a specific school, one big feature for them is if it's close by their school. Also, depending on which school it is and where it's located, do most of the students have their own cars or do most of them take public transit? Because if most of them take public transit to get to school, if that's something they rely on, then making sure that you have that the location is close to bus routes and relatively easy to get to the school and to get to grocery stores and things like that is important. But let's say most of the students, maybe it's a very elite private school where most students have their own fancy cars. If that's the case, perhaps having on-site parking right there is the feature that the students want, right? So it just depends on the students, right? What if it's a family? What would a family want in terms of features, right? What about a single person or couple? What features would they want? So, looking at the target market and also what kind of features they would want based on that. The next one, super important, is how much supply versus demand is there, right? Because if there is more supply than the demand, then that is going to make what's going to make your rental stand out then, right? Because for example, if you're in a market where there's lots of demand and people are scrambling to get housing, then even if if your rental doesn't have any special features, someone is going to want to rent it, right? You're still going to get multiple applications just based on the fact that the demand is high. That said, what's going to make your rental stand out if it's, in a location where there's a bit more, there's not as much demand, there's more supply, there's other options that people have in the free market. Is there going to be a promotion? Or maybe are there extra features that your rental is going to have that others don't have? Is your rental more new and up to date? Is it in a better location than other rentals? Like, what makes it stand out? Why would someone decide to, rent the place you're offering rather than going out and renting something else that's also available on the market? What makes yours stand out? So that's important. And even if there is more demand currently, right, than supply, that could always change. So having good features that the target market looks for can just be a good thing in general. And I'll give some examples on that later. But it's especially important if there is more supply than demand. Otherwise, you may not find quality renters to rent the place. Okay, the next one is who are your competitors and what do they offer, and what do you offer that they don't, right? So, for example, if it's student rentals, for example, who are the competitors? Well, likely other people doing the same thing, or even people renting out an extra bedroom in the house where they also live. The school residents. If the school has some on-campus housing, you're also competing with the on-campus housing as well. So that's important. Also, what are your starting and ongoing costs? So, how much will it cost you initially? And then, what are the monthly expenses going to be like approximately and exactly for ones that you know exactly as well? Keep that in mind too. Okay, so let's talk about potential startup costs. So, down payment, land transfer tax, legal fees, and inspector fees, pretty straightforward there. Then renovations if applicable. So sometimes someone will buy an older house and then renovate it, right? Now, oftentimes, in my personal opinion, it is a lot easier to just buy a new build. buy something that's already nice and renovated rather than having to deal with renovations. But if you're someone who has some expertise in that, then fantastic, great. That could be a good option for you. Or maybe there really aren't new builds available in that location. And so renovating something that already exists is really the only option you have. Now, renovations can be very expensive, and they also do have there's often like certain permits you have to get depending what renovations you do, certain rules. They also do take a while as well, or at least they can take a while. And of course, you're still paying the mortgage and some of the certain expenses, even though no one's actually paying you rent yet, whilst the place that they're not yet living in is still being renovated, right? Because likely the renovations are going to be completed or near enough completed before you start marketing, and then you start marketing and kind of go from there. But either way, renovations could be a potential startup cost depending on the situation. So do consider that if that is something that's necessary. The other one is furniture, if applicable, right? So if you're doing a short-term rental like an Airbnb or Verbo or that kind of thing, then furniture, even though it's not necessarily like something you absolutely have to do technically, no one is going to want to spend a week at a vacation house that isn't furnished, right? Have you ever been to an Airbnb or a hotel that didn't already have furniture in it? Because my guess is probably not, right? And if there was one, people would be a lot less likely to choose it because people don't want to have to go through the hassle. And also, they don't have to go through the hassle because every competitor is going to have furniture. And so, even though technically I don't think there's some law that I'm aware of anyway that says that if you have a short term rental place, you have to include furniture, but generally it is in your best interest to include furniture in a short term rental, right? Even a medium term rental in some situations. If it's a student rental, that may be something you want to consider, right? It might be an incentive for students to choose to rent your place over someone else's if there's other places that are unfurnished and your place already has furniture, so they don't have to go through that hassle, right? Now, that said, there would be some other reasons to not get furniture and not furnish a place. So, for instance, if your target market is a family that's going to stay for 3 to 5 years, a small family that likely has their own furniture and also, in some cases would prefer to, if they need any new furniture for the place, to get it themselves and have full control over that and, know what items and what types of styles they like, that could be a big motivator for them, to not have the furniture as well. So there are some cases where it might make more sense, not just financial sense, but just in general, it might make more sense to not furnish a place. So depending on the situation, you may want to include furniture and have it built, or you might not want to. The next one is household items or home decor, if applicable. So this would be more, again, this would be more for short-term rentals specifically, because generally for long-term rentals, people bring their own household items. They bring their own plates and cups and cutlery and pots and pans and everything like that. And they bring their own home decor if they would like to have home decor in the place they're going to be renting long term, the place that's going to be their home for a while. Whereas for, again, for short term rentals, typically this is included in a lot of cases. So you may want to consider including it as well, right? Not that there's some, law of, oh, you must provide home decor in your Airbnb, but, it might be nicer, right? You might get nicer pictures if you style your home decor correctly and be able to market better if you know how to do that right? If you're a good interior decorator. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so let's do an example of startup costs. So a down payment of 20% of the purchase price of the housing, about $10,000 to $15,000 for land transfer tax. Now, again, for this one, this is just a guesstimate. Look it up in the city or place you're looking at investing in, because this is just an example. About $1,000 to $1,500 for legal fees sounds about right. 500 for an inspector and 5,000 for furniture. So there you go. Sounds about right. Okay, now what are the ongoing costs? Well, the ongoing costs are the mortgage payment, property tax, and home insurance. So those are definitely guaranteed ones no matter what, right? No matter what, you're going to have to make the mortgage payments unless you have purchased the property outright, would be the only exception to that. Or if you've had the property for so long and the mortgage payments are all done and you fully own it, then great. Property tax, also very important. Home insurance, also very important. I believe it's mandatory in a lot of places to have home insurance, and I know for sure it's mandatory to pay property tax. So definitely look into how much that's going to be. Then we have things that are like utilities and internet, which just say if applicable, because these are not always going to be applicable to you. In some tenancies, especially if it's people staying there for a long term, perhaps the utility bills in some cases are in the tenant's name, and it's up to the tenant to pay their utility bills to have utilities coming to the place they're living. And if they don't do that, then that's on them, right? Or sometimes utilities are included, or sometimes if the landlord and tenant both live there, maybe the tenant is responsible for a certain percentage of the utilities, or maybe utilities are just included in the price, things like that. If it's a short term rental, though, definitely utilities are going to be landlord's responsibility and are just kind of taken into account when pricing the Airbnb, because to, you know, bill everyone a certain amount for utilities, you don't really do that for a hotel or Airbnb. That's just kind of something included. Same with internet, right? Same with internet. If there's people staying there long term, they could just get internet for themselves and keep it for the years that they're staying there. But if there's consistently people moving in and out in a shorter term rental, just having internet set up there, it makes a lot more sense than having every single person have to get their own internet themselves. There's also lawn and snow maintenance, if applicable. I mean, that's going to depend on whether it's, is it a house or is it an apartment building or something like that. The sometimes the condo corporation takes care of things like that, and so it's not your job whatsoever to manage that. Other times it is, so it just depends. You could also outsource something like that potentially if you live in a place where that is the landlord's responsibility to take care of lawn and snow maintenance. That could be something outsourced as well. The next one is a cleanup crew if applicable, right? So this also is going to depend somewhat on how frequently people are coming in and out, right? This is going to be probably a more frequent expense. If it's short-term rental, things need to be cleaned up between people. Whereas if someone's renting, ends up renting the place for years and years at a time, it's got to be clean when they come in. But after that, it's on them to keep their space clean for sure. So that might be a once every few years kind of thing in certain events, and other times something that's done often. So it just depends. There's also advertising costs. So these vary greatly, right? Some people spend barely anything on advertising every year because they're not even advertising the property every year. Other times, like if someone's doing like Airbnb or things like that, Airbnb already kind of takes some advertising fees, so that could be something. There's also some places that don't charge as much for advertising, so it just kind of depends. This one can vary greatly for different people, for different situations as well, so keep that in mind. The next one is inspection, right? So every once in a while, it's good to do an inspection just to make sure that everything's up to safety standards, especially if there's something specific that you're thinking, oh, that might not be up to safety standards, or like, oh, that's a little scary. Maybe we should get a professional to come in and take a look at it just to make sure it's it's safe and in good working order. Or in the event that it isn't, that way we can know so we can fix it in a timely manner and not just have it get worse and worse and potentially harm someone at some point. So that's important. And then also, last but not least, there is maintenance as well. So keep that in mind too. Maintenance. That's going to be a bit harder to do like on a per month basis, because most months there's not going to be any maintenance costs. But once in a while there will be some big project, right? Unless it's an apartment building where you don't have to be responsible for fixing the roof, right? Every 15 or so years, you might have to get a new roof, right? Every 10 to 15 years, you might need to get a new air conditioner and a new furnace, right? Now that's not very frequent, right? If you own something for like 30 years for that big mortgage duration, that's only going to need to be done a time or two, right? So it's certainly not going to be very often that you're going to have to pay these large amounts for these big ticket items, but it'll happen sometimes. Or sometimes something breaks and it costs a few $100s to get it fixed. Or maybe you're a very handy person and you're able to fix a lot of these things yourself, and if so, that's great, right? Maybe you don't always need to hire a maintenance person. Or even if you're not a handy person, there's even then some tasks that really don't require a maintenance person, right? I mean, I always say to people, if the tenant calls you and tells you that there's a clog in the drain, before freaking out and calling a plumber, try Drano first, because so oftentimes the problem is nothing that a $10 bottle of Drano won't fix. Now, in the event that that doesn't fix it, then absolutely get the professionals, get whoever's necessary, but no reason to do that if it is unnecessary. Or there's even times where maybe the tenants try it, they said it didn't work, but they didn't follow the instructions. It specifically said you have to put warm water down the sink like hot water for it to work, and they didn't do that. Or you're supposed to wait 30 minutes, you didn't wait 30 minutes, and that's why it didn't work. So even if they didn't think it worked, follow the instructions, do it properly, see if it works, because sometimes they've just done it wrong in some cases, and if you do it correctly, then it's good, right? Because with Drano, you really need to use hot water. You can't just use cold water and expect it to work the same way, and you have to wait the time that it says you're supposed to wait. You can't just pour it down the drain and 2 minutes later expect that, oh, it's good enough, let's continue. It doesn't work that way. Your drain is still going to be clogged if you do that. Okay, so here's an example of some ongoing costs and what they could be. And again, this depends on the situation. So for some people, for example, there wouldn't be any cost for utility bills and internet if that's the tenant's responsibility, which it is in some situations, it isn't in other situations. Same with lawn and snow maintenance if the condo group takes care of that, right? If that's already included in like condo fees or something like that, you likely wouldn't also pay separately for maintenance in that situation. So there's things like that definitely to keep in mind, right? So there's lots of costs that can vary greatly. The next thing you need to do after you've gone over all of this is research the market. So, how much are other similar properties renting for in this area? And keywords here are in this area because the area makes all the difference, right? It's crazy how much both rent prices and also home purchase prices can vary depending on the area, right? If you're looking for even just a one bedroom apartment in Los Angeles and how much that rents for and also how much that sells for, like that's going to rent for more than and also can be bought for a lot more than in other locations, like a 4 bedroom house with a lot, right, with everything, right? And so location is huge, right? The location is going to be a big determiner for how much something should cost, right, and how you should price it, right? And so seeing that, this property looks really similar to mine, but it's in a completely different location. No, that means it's not a similar property because it's not in a similar area. When I say similar properties, that means similar number of bedrooms, bathrooms, similar square footage, and also similar location is important. Also, in some cases, it also matters how newly renovated things are because that can add value for certain people as well. If something is newly renovated versus another space that's similar in other ways is not newly renovated, the newly renovated space may rent out for more than something that's very dated, oftentimes. So that's important. Also, what kinds of features do the competitors often have, and how important are they to the target market? Right? So, are the features that competitors have important to the target market? Because if so, we should also make sure that we have them as well. Otherwise, who is going to choose to rent our place over the competitors? However, features that are unimportant to them may not be worth spending the money on to get the upgrade. And then the next one is what are the most cost effective ways to offer the product that the target market wants? So, for example, let's say you have a student rental and there's a continuous problem that there just isn't enough fridge space because too many people live there and there just isn't enough fridge space. Rather than getting a brand new second fridge to add to the fridge space, you could look for some deals on Kijiji or Facebook Marketplace and get one for literally a fraction of the value. Instead of spending over $1,000 on a new fridge, spend $200 or $300 on a fridge that is not entirely new but it's perfectly good. Give it a wipe down, give it a nice deep clean, get it all plugged in, all working, everything like that. And there you go. People still got the same value that they needed, which was more fridge space, but in a more cost effective way, right? Or back with the example of, there's the drain is clogged. Well, let's not just jump to the conclusion that we need a plumber. Let's try Drano first. And if that fixes the problem, fantastic. If that doesn't fix the problem, then we can get a professional, right? If we're all out of options, right? But other things like that, thinking about how can we best, give the, the target market the things that they care about, at a price that isn't going to break the bank. Now, I do want to mention too, this does not always mean for just going for the cheapest option, right? Think about what is the least expensive way to do things over time, right? So I'm not saying, for example, to just go for, a very band-aid solution that isn't really going to fully fix the problem just because it's cheaper. However, in terms of the, good, full, long-term solutions that we could possibly come up with, which one is going to make the most sense, the most financial sense for us to go into? Because there's also no point in just spending extra money for the sake of it. It's important to be as cost effective as possible and choose the best options possible, right? And often that means going for something middle of the road, right? If we're going to buy a chair, for example, we're probably not going to spend $1,000 on an office chair, right? That's ridiculous. That's so much money. But are we going to go to IKEA and spend $10 or $15 on an office chair? No, because that office chair is not going to be as comfortable and is not going to last as long as other office chairs. We may want to go for something in the middle, right? That might make the most sense cost for use wise, where we're not spending $1,000 on a chair, we're spending $200 or $300 on a chair, but it's still a good enough chair that it's going to last a lot longer than the $10 or $15 chair, and it's going to be a very good comfortable chair, things like that. So going for middle of the road things that are going to make the most sense, long term is the key here, right? Or same with, let's say you're going to get a new bag, doesn't mean you're going to get a $10 bag from Walmart that's not going to last very long and that's going to just fall apart after a few uses, right? That's probably not very cost effective. But it's also simultaneously, it's not very cost effective to get a Chanel bag that costs $10,000 or $5,000 or however much they cost, if the goal here is to be cost effective, right? Perhaps getting something in the middle, maybe a bag that costs $50 to $100, that is good and durable and that's going to last you a very long time and be very reliable for you, is likely the best bet, right? We're not spending crazy, crazy amounts of money, but we're also not just going with the cheapest option possible that's going to break and not really be functional for very long. So it's that sort of thing, or applying that kind of mindset around these investments is good, right? Because at the end of the day, tenants don't need the most crazy expensive option, and at the end of the day, that's going to likely make the rent higher, so that they likely don't want that either. That's not good. But they also are going to be annoyed if everything keeps breaking all the time randomly. Like if on a regular basis things keep breaking, that's probably also not going to be very good, right? So there we go. All right. So that is going to be it for today. Good work, everyone. And I will see you next day. Bye, everyone.